This is the story of the people who dared to speak, lead, or rebel and paid for it with their lives. From cathedrals soaked in betrayal, to kings murdered mid-feast, and revolutionaries silenced mid-speech. These are the most shocking assassination stories in human history. This is the story of the man who knew speaking the truth could get him killed, and it did, but his voice wouldn't be silenced. Archbishop Oscar Romero was a powerful figure in El Salvador, who was a fierce critic of the country's widespread social injustice, where 2% of the population controlled 57% of the land. He spoke out against the brutal violence of military and paramilitary death squads that terrorized the population, which included the murder of his close friend and colleague Rutilio Grande, S.J. Romero implored them to stop the repression and to obey God's law over man's. On March 24, 1980, Romero was shot and killed by an assassin while giving Mass. But the shocking thing was, before his assassination, Romero was well aware that his outspokenness would likely lead to his death. But he refused to be silenced. In one of his interviews before the gruesome event, he stated, "If they kill me, I will rise again in the people of El Salvador." Romero's assassination made him a symbol of hope and a prophet for social justice in Latin America. In 1994, he was recognized by Pope John Paul II as a martyr, and in 2018, he was declared a saint. This is a heart-wrenching story of what happens when your best friend becomes your mortal enemy, and you have him murdered in a cathedral. Thomas Becket was a prominent figure in 12th century England, serving as the Archbishop of Canterbury. He began his career as a close friend and trusted advisor to King Henry II, who appointed him to the key position of Chancellor. The king was confident that Becket would support his efforts to increase the crown's power over the church. But when Becket was appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, everything changed. He resigned as Chancellor and began to champion the independence and authority of the church, directly clashing with the king. The conflict escalated in 1164 when Becket refused to agree to the Constitutions of Clarendon, which was a set of laws designed to limit the church's power, and fled to France to escape Henry's wrath. After 6 years in exile, he returned to England, only to further infuriate the king by excommunicating the bishops who had crowned Henry's son, a role traditionally reserved for the Archbishop of Canterbury. Henry, in a fit of rage, famously shouted, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" On saying that, 4 knights took the king's words literally and murdered Becket in Canterbury Cathedral in 1170. The brutal murder sent shockwaves across Europe. Henry publicly repented for his outburst, and Becket was declared a saint. His tomb became a major pilgrimage site, and the incident cemented the church's power in England. In November 1440, 2 teenage brothers were invited to a royal feast and left in coffins. In Scotland around 1437, 6-year-old James II became King of Scotland after his father was assassinated. But being a child on the throne meant Scotland was ruled by rival factions, and none were more feared than the powerful Douglas clan. The Douglas clan was so powerful that they were seen as a threat to the young King James II due to their authority over the Scottish throne and politics. When 15-year-old William Douglas became Earl of Douglas, together with his 12-year-old brother David in 1439, on November 1442, in an attempt at peace, King James was said to have invited the 2 brothers to a grand banquet at Edinburgh Castle. The feast was a lavish affair, with music, food, and drink flowing freely. For a moment, it felt like the bitter rivalry between the Crown and the Douglas clan might finally be over. However, midway through the dinner, the mood in the Great Hall shifted. The doors opened, and a servant entered, carrying a large platter. On it sat the severed head of a black bull, which was Scotland's ancient symbol of death. Before the Douglas brothers could react, the king's men seized them. They were dragged outside into the cold night and held a mock trial. Within minutes, both were executed by beheading on Castle Hill. This brutal act of betrayal became known as the Black Dinner. Research has shown it is not absolutely clear who orchestrated the Black Dinner of 1440. At the time of the event, King James was 10 years old, and William Crichton was both Lord Chancellor of Scotland and Keeper of Edinburgh Castle. This meant the young king was in his custody, but Crichton's continuing successes in his career following the Black Dinner definitely point to his involvement in the dreadful plot, and the act sparked years of vengeance and clan wars across Scotland. On March 15, 44 BCE, the most powerful man in Rome walked into the Senate, and never walked out. In 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was the most powerful man in Rome. He was a brilliant general, a war hero, and was loved by the people. But in the Senate, fear was brewing. Senators whispered that Caesar planned to crown himself king, and to save the Republic, they plotted his death. On the Ides of March, Caesar entered the Senate. Unaware that many of the men around him he thought were allies carried daggers. They greeted him as usual, and then the first dagger struck, then another, and another. Caesar tried to fight back, but they were too many. With 23 stab wounds in total, Rome's most powerful man was killed. His final betrayal came from the one man Caesar trusted most, his close friend Brutus. Legend says his last words were, "Et tu, Brute," which translates to, "You too, Brutus." But the conspirators' victory was short-lived. Caesar's assassination didn't save the Roman Republic. Instead, it destroyed it, plunging Rome into civil war and paving the way for a new ruler, Augustus, who would become the first emperor of Rome, bringing about the end of the Republic and the birth of the Roman Empire. History is full of wild deaths, but have you heard of the king who was assassinated on the toilet? In the early 11th century, a young king named Edmund Ironside ruled England, a land under relentless attack from the Viking warlord, Canute, who wouldn't stop until he conquered the whole country. For months, Edmund and his army fought fiercely to repel the invasion, earning his nickname Ironside for his courage. But his reign came to a shockingly strange end. Legend says the king went to relieve himself in his private chambers, when an assassin, hiding nearby, struck, stabbing him to death right there on the royal latrine. With Edmund gone, Canute seized his chance, taking the English throne and bringing England under Viking rule. The assassination of Edmund is one of the strangest deaths in history, and a brutal reminder that no one, not even a king, is safe from vulnerability. On April 4, 1968, at 6:05 p.m., a single gunshot changed America forever. On April 4, 1968, at 6:05 p.m., Martin Luther King Jr. was standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, supporting striking sanitation workers, when a bullet struck him, killing instantly the most powerful voice of the civil rights movement. News of his assassination ignited riots in over 100 cities across the United States, leaving more than 40 people dead. The FBI's investigation traced the shot to James Earl Ray, a 40-year-old escaped convict. His fingerprints were on the Remington rifle which was found near the crime scene, and further evidence placed him at a rooming house with a direct view of King's motel room. Ray was caught after an international manhunt and was eventually extradited from Britain to stand trial. Ray initially confessed to the murder in a plea bargain, but then quickly recanted shortly after being sentenced to a 99-year prison term, claiming he was a scapegoat. Over the years, conspiracy theories arose, fueled by the FBI's history of surveillance of King. Shockingly, in 1997, King's family believed Ray wasn't the true killer and publicly called for a new trial. Despite this, Tennessee authorities refused to reopen the case, and Ray died in prison in 1998. King's family's own civil lawsuit in 1999 concluded that Ray was a scapegoat and that there was a larger conspiracy, but subsequent official investigations have never found proof of a government plot. What was certain is this: that night in Memphis silenced a man but ignited a movement that changed the course of America's and world history forever.